The metal burned against Marcus Webb's wrists. Not real metal, but something far worse. Energy shackles that bit into his skin with every small movement. He stood in the center of the massive courtroom, alone under lights that felt like suns, pressing down on him. The Galactic Tribunal building stretched high above his head. Crystal walls reached up so far he could not see the top. Strange alien writing covered every surface, glowing with soft blue light. The air tasted wrong in his mouth. Too clean. Too perfect. Around him sat hundreds of alien beings. Some looked like giant insects with clicking mandibles. Others were tall and thin like walking sticks. A few seemed to be made of liquid metal that shifted and moved as they breathed. All of them stared at him with eyes full of hate. Marcus had seen combat on 12 different worlds. He had faced enemy fire without flinching. He had watched friends die and kept moving forward. But standing here, chained like an animal, made his chest tight with something he did not want to call fear. The judge's platform rose 20 feet above the courtroom floor. On it sat the most terrifying being Marcus had ever seen. The Eternal. Judge was made of pure light, but not the warm kind that came from Earth's sun. This was cold light, ancient light, the kind that had been burning since before humans learned to make fire. The creature beside the judge looked like a praying mantis that had grown to the size of a horse. Its green carapace gleamed under the court lights. When it moved, its joints made soft clicking sounds that echoed through the silent room. "The defendant will state his name for the record," the mantis creature said. Its voice came from somewhere deep in its throat like grinding stones. "Captain Marcus Webb, United Earth Defense Force," Marcus replied. His voice sounded small in the huge space. "Former captain," the creature corrected. "Your rank was stripped when charges were filed." It turned to face the gallery of aliens. This human stands accused of crimes against 17 member species of the Galactic Council. The charges include genocide, violation of the Cosmic Accords, and unprovoked acts of war. A wave of angry chittering and clicking filled the courtroom. Some aliens rose from their seats, shaking appendages at Marcus. Others made sounds he could not identify, but knew were not friendly. The mantis creature raised one sharp arm for silence. "I am High Arbiter Velthok. I will present the evidence of this human's crimes against civilized society." Marcus looked around the room for his defense lawyer. He found the slug-like being hunched over a small table to his left. Advocate Morden was barely 3 feet tall and covered in gray slime that dripped slowly onto the floor. The creature had not looked up once since the trial began. "The evidence is clear," Velthok continued. "This human and his kind have brought nothing but death and destruction to our galaxy. They arrived claiming to seek peace and trade. Instead, they built weapons. They established military bases on peaceful worlds. They turned paradise planets into war zones." The High Arbiter gestured with one sharp claw. The air above the courtroom shimmered and changed. Suddenly, Marcus was looking at holographic images floating in space above his head. The first image showed human ships approaching a blue and green world. The ships looked small and peaceful. "This is the colony world of New Haven," Velthok said. "A peaceful human settlement, or so they claimed." The image changed. Now it showed the same world, but different. Military structures covered the surface. Ships with weapon systems orbited the planet. Soldiers in human uniforms marched in formation. Within 2 years, the humans had built a fortress world. They brought in weapons that could destroy moons. They established training camps for their warriors. They turned a garden world into a military base designed for one purpose: war. More images appeared, human soldiers fighting on alien worlds, cities burning under human weapons, ships exploding in space as human fleets advanced through star systems. Marcus watched the images with growing anger. They were real, but they told only part of the story. The images showed human victories, but not what came before. They showed human weapons firing, but not what they were firing at. They showed destruction, but not the reasons for it. The humans claimed self-defense, Velthok said, his voice dripping with disgust. They said they were protecting their colonies from attack. But who attacked first? Who brought war to peaceful systems? Who turned trade routes into battlegrounds? The images kept changing. Each one showed humans fighting, humans winning, humans standing over defeated enemies. But Marcus knew what the court did not see. He knew about the raids on human colonies. He knew about families torn apart by alien slavers. He knew about children who disappeared in the night when the wrong ships came calling. Look at this evidence, Velthok continued. In the Battle of Centauri 7, human forces destroyed an entire crystalline fleet. 2,000 beings of pure energy, snuffed out in moments by human weapons. The humans called this a victory. We call it murder. Marcus remembered Centauri 7. He remembered the crystalline ships moving to surround the human colony. He remembered the demands to surrender all human women and children to be used as experimental subjects. He remembered making the hardest decision of his military career. The Corvan Massacre, Velthok said, showing new images. Human Marines landed on Corva Prime and engaged in what they called a rescue operation. The result? An entire city reduced to rubble. Thousands of Corvan dead. The humans said they were freeing prisoners. The survivors called it genocide. Marcus's hands clenched into fists, despite the burning pain from his shackles. The court was not seeing the Corvan prison camps. They were not seeing the human prisoners being tortured for sport. They were not seeing the children kept in cages, like animals. Time after time, wherever humans go, death follows, Velthok declared. They are a plague species, a cancer that spreads through the galaxy, consuming everything in its path. They have no honor, no mercy, no understanding of civilized behavior. The alien gallery erupted in agreement. Voices in dozens of languages called for justice. Some called for punishment. Others called for something worse. Marcus stood in the center of it all, chained and alone. His defense lawyer still had not moved. The eternal judge sat silent on his throne of light. The evidence mounted against him like a wall he could not climb. But Marcus Webb had been a soldier for 20 years. He had learned one important lesson in all that time. The truth had a way of coming out, no matter how deeply people tried to bury it. He would wait. He would listen. And when the time came, he would speak words that would shake this court to its foundation. The trial was just beginning. The second day of the trial began with the sound of Marcus Webb's shackles clicking against the metal floor. He had not slept well in his cell. The energy bars that kept him locked up hummed all night long, making a sound like angry bees trapped in glass. High Arbiter Velthok stood at the center of the courtroom, his green carapace catching the light from above. Today he looked even more confident than before. Today he had witnesses. The court calls its first witness, Velthok announced. Elder Zimnara of the Crystalline Collective. The air near the witness stand began to shimmer and glow. Slowly, a being of pure crystal took shape. It was tall and thin, with facets that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. When it moved, it made soft chiming sounds like wind through glass bells. Elder Zimnara, Velthok said, please tell the court what happened at Centauri 7, the crystal being turned toward Marcus, and he could feel hatred radiating from it like heat from a furnace. When it spoke, its voice sounded like music, played on broken instruments. The humans came to our system without warning, Zimnara said. Our ships approached to offer greeting and trade. The humans responded with weapons fire. They used electromagnetic pulse bombs that shattered our crystalline matrices. 2,000 of my people died in agony, their life force scattered to the void. Murmurs of sympathy filled the courtroom. Several alien species made clicking or humming sounds that Marcus guessed meant sorrow or anger. Did the humans attempt "Any form of communication before attacking?" Velthok asked. "None," the crystal being replied. "They opened fire the moment our ships came within range. They showed no mercy, no hesitation. They murdered peaceful explorers whose only crime was curiosity about these new beings in our galaxy." Marcus wanted to stand up and shout the truth. The crystalline ships had not come to trade. They had come to collect specimens for their biological research. They had sent messages demanding that the human colony surrender their children for experimentation. When the colonists refused, the crystalline ships had begun forming an attack pattern, but Marcus stayed silent. His time would come. The next witness was even worse. A being that looked like liquid mercury flowed into the witness stand and took the shape of a person. This was Commander Flux of the Molten Republic. "Tell the court about the incident at Kepler Station," Velthok said. The mercury being rippled as it spoke. "Humans established a trading post in our territory without permission. When we approached to discuss territorial boundaries, they accused us of being hostile. Their ambassador actually claimed we were planning to attack civilian targets." The liquid metal creature paused, and Marcus could see anger in the way it moved. "The humans then released oxygen into our atmosphere processing centers. For beings like us, oxygen is deadly poison. 17 of my people died from oxygen poisoning. The humans called it an accident, but we know better." Marcus remembered Kepler Station. He remembered the Molten Republic ships surrounding the small human outpost. He remembered the intercepted communications talking about melting the human structures and absorbing the metal for their own use. The oxygen release had not been an attack. It had been a desperate attempt to create a buffer zone when the molten ships began to advance. But again, Marcus said nothing. The witnesses kept coming. An insect creature with compound eyes spoke about humans destroying its hive worlds. A gas-based lifeform complained that human breathing was toxic to its kind. A rock creature claimed humans had committed genocide by mining operations on its homeworld. Each testimony painted humans as monsters. Each story made the gallery of aliens more angry. Each witness made Marcus's chances of survival smaller. Then something changed. Velthok called for a special transmission from Earth itself. The air above the courtroom shimmered, and suddenly Marcus was looking at a familiar face. Admiral Lisa Stone appeared as a hologram, standing in what looked like a military briefing room. Her uniform was crisp and clean, but Marcus could see the tiredness in her eyes. "Admiral Stone," Velthok said, "you commanded human forces during many of the conflicts we have discussed. Do you deny that human ships fired first in these encounters?" Admiral Stone looked directly at Marcus for a long moment. Then she turned to face the court. "I do not deny that human forces opened fire," she said. "In every case mentioned, human ships or installations did indeed fire the first shots." The alien gallery erupted in satisfaction. Several creatures made sounds that Marcus thought might be laughter. Even his own defense lawyer looked up from his table for the first time, though his expression was one of defeat. But Admiral Stone was not finished. "However," she continued, "I must clarify the circumstances of each engagement. In the case of Centauri 7, the crystalline fleet had demanded the surrender of all human children for medical experimentation. When the colony refused, the crystalline ships began to form attack formations. Our ships fired first, but only after it became clear that peaceful resolution was impossible." Velthok waved a claw dismissively. "The Admiral speaks of attack formations, but the crystalline vessels were merely positioning themselves for optimal communication." "Communication does not require surrounding a planet with 200 armed vessels," Admiral Stone replied coldly. "Communication does not require jamming all civilian channels and demanding the immediate surrender of non-combatants." The prosecutor's mandibles clicked angrily. "The Admiral's interpretation of events is clearly biased. She seeks to justify unprovoked aggression with fabricated claims of alien hostility." "I fabricate nothing," Admiral Stone said. Every engagement followed the same pattern. Alien forces would approach human settlements with overwhelming military superiority. They would make demands that no civilized species could accept. When humans refused to surrender their people, their freedom, or their rights, the aliens would begin aggressive maneuvers. Only then did human forces respond with defensive action. Marcus felt a small spark of hope. At least someone was telling the human side of the story. But Velthok was ready with another attack. "Admiral," he said, "you speak of defensive actions, but human military doctrine specifically includes preemptive strikes against potential threats. Is it not true that humans attack first based on perceived future danger rather than actual present threat?" Admiral Stone's jaw tightened. "Human military doctrine prioritizes the protection of civilian populations. When hostile forces approach our colonies with weapons and demands, we do not wait for them to open fire on helpless civilians. So you admit that humans strike first based on assumptions and fears rather than actual hostile actions?" "I admit that humans protect their own," Admiral Stone said firmly. "We do not sacrifice innocent lives to maintain the appearance of being peaceful." The connection flickered and died. Admiral Stone's hologram vanished, leaving Marcus alone with his accusers once more. Velthok turned to address the Eternal Judge, who had remained silent throughout the entire proceedings. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, "the evidence is overwhelming. Even their own military leader admits that humans fire first, attack first, and kill first. They are a species that chooses violence over diplomacy, war over peace, aggression over understanding." The alien gallery voiced its agreement with a chorus of clicks, hums, and whistles. Marcus stood in his chains, watching his species being condemned by beings who had never faced the choices humans faced. They spoke of peace from positions of strength. They condemned violence while threatening those weaker than themselves. But Marcus Webb had learned patience in 20 years of military service. His time to speak was coming, and when it came, he would show them what it truly meant to be human. The third day of the trial brought a different feeling to the courtroom. Marcus Webb could sense it in the way the aliens whispered among themselves before the session began. Their chittering and clicking sounded more excited now, more hungry. Today would be the final day. Today, judgment would be passed on all of humanity. High Arbiter Velthok entered the courtroom with what Marcus could only describe as a victory walk. The mantis creature's steps were lighter, his head held higher. He moved like a hunter who had cornered his prey. "Your Honor," Velthok began, addressing the silent figure of the Eternal Judge, 3 days of testimony have proven beyond doubt that humanity represents a clear and present danger to galactic civilization. The prosecutor turned to face the gallery of alien representatives. His voice grew louder and more dramatic as he spoke. "We have heard witness after witness describe human brutality. We have seen evidence of human aggression on dozens of worlds. We have even heard their own military. Commander, admit that humans strike first and ask questions later." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the alien crowd. A creature that looked like a walking tree swayed back and forth in approval. A being made of living gas pulsed with satisfaction. "But the evidence goes deeper than simple military aggression," Velthok continued. "Let us examine the very nature of human culture itself." The air above the courtroom shimmered again, and new holographic images appeared. This time, they showed scenes from Earth itself. Marcus recognized some of them: historical footage, art museums, concert halls. "Look at their entertainment," Velthok said, pointing at images of human movies and television shows. "Violence and conflict are central themes in every form of human art. They create stories about war, murder, and destruction for pleasure. The images changed to show human sports, boxing matches, football games, martial arts tournaments. Even their recreational activities involve combat," the prosecutor declared. "They train their children to fight from an early age. They celebrate those who can inflict the most damage on their opponents." More images appeared. These showed human history, ancient battles, medieval wars, modern conflicts. Throughout their entire recorded history, humans have been at war with something or someone. They fight their environment, they fight other species, they fight each other. When they have no external enemies, they create internal ones. Marcus felt his anger growing with each word. The prosecutor was showing only part of the truth, twisting human nature into something ugly and evil. Consider their literature, Velthok went on. Images of books appeared in the air. Their greatest works of art are about struggle, conflict, and death. They write poems about war. They compose music about battles. They create sculptures of warriors and weapons. The alien gallery was fully engaged now. Some creatures leaned forward in their seats. Others made sounds that Marcus guessed were expressions of disgust or fear. "This is not a species that learned violence from necessity," Velthok declared. "This is a species that chose violence as their defining characteristic. They could have evolved differently. They could have chosen cooperation over competition, peace over conflict. Instead, they embraced their savage nature and spread it across the stars." The prosecutor paused for dramatic effect, letting his words sink in. "The evidence is clear. Humanity is not just a threat to individual species or specific star systems. They are a threat to the very concept of civilized society. They are a cancer that will spread until it consumes everything in its path." Velthok raised his arms wide, addressing the entire courtroom. "Therefore, I recommend the harshest possible sentence. Humanity must be completely isolated from galactic society. All human colonies beyond Earth must be evacuated. All human ships must be impounded. A permanent energy barrier must be erected around the Sol system to contain this species before they can do more damage." The alien gallery exploded in approval. Creatures of every shape and size rose to their feet, making sounds of agreement and satisfaction. Some called out suggestions for even harsher punishments. Marcus heard one voice suggest turning Earth into a prison planet. Another recommended relocating all humans to a dead world where they could fight each other without bothering anyone else. A third voice called for something Marcus didn't want to think about. Through all of this, the eternal judge remained silent and motionless on his throne of pure light. Velthok waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "Several member species have already expressed interest in claiming former human territories," he said. "The Crystalline Collective wishes to establish research stations on 3 former human worlds. The Molten Republic has requested mining rights to asteroid belts previously claimed by humans. The Corvan Empire seeks to colonize the Garden worlds that humans abandoned." Marcus realized with growing horror that this trial had been planned long before he arrived. The aliens had already decided humanity's fate. They were just going through the motions of justice while dividing up human space like vultures picking over a corpse. "As for the humans themselves," Velthok said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "those currently living on colony worlds will be relocated to Earth. Any who resist this relocation will be considered criminals and dealt with accordingly." The prosecutor turned to look directly at Marcus. "The defendant, Captain Marcus Webb, stands as a symbol of human aggression and disregard for galactic law. I recommend that he be sentenced to life imprisonment as a warning to any other humans who might consider following his path." Velthok returned to his seat, and the courtroom fell silent. All eyes turned to Marcus's defense attorney, the slug-like creature called Advocate Morden. The gray, slimy being slowly rose from his chair and shuffled toward the center of the courtroom. He looked around nervously, his eye stalks twitching. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that Marcus could barely hear him. "Your Honor," Morden squeaked, "the evidence against my client is substantial. I can offer no real defense against the charges. I can only ask for mercy for a species that perhaps does not understand the harm it has caused." That was it. That was Marcus's entire defense. A plea for mercy based on ignorance. The advocate sat down without another word, and Marcus knew that. He was completely alone. The eternal judge leaned forward on his throne. For the first time in 3 days, the ancient being seemed ready to speak. The defendant will have the opportunity to speak in his own defense, the judge announced. His voice filled the courtroom like rolling thunder. Captain Marcus Webb, you may address this court. The energy shackles around Marcus's wrists pulsed with power, but he felt no pain now. The time had finally come. The time to speak not just for himself, but for every human who had ever lived, who was living now, or who might live in the future. Marcus Webb stood up straighter and looked around the courtroom. He met the eyes of his accusers without flinching. He gazed up at the eternal judge without fear. When he began to speak, his voice was clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. "You want to know what humans are?" Marcus said. "You want to understand why we fight?" He paused, gathering his thoughts, preparing to tell them truths they had never heard before. "Then listen carefully, because I am about to tell you." Marcus Webb stood in the center of the courtroom, energy shackles burning against his wrists. Every alien eye was fixed on him. Some looked curious. Most looked hostile. All waited to hear what this condemned human would say before his species was cast into darkness. "You call us violent," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. "You are right. You call us destructive. You are not wrong. But you do not understand what you condemn." He looked around the courtroom, meeting alien gazes without fear. "Let me tell you about violence. Let me tell you about the species you judge so harshly." Marcus took a deep breath and began to speak of Earth, of humanity's beginning. "We came from a world that tried to kill us every single day. Our planet had ice ages that buried continents under miles of frozen death. It had volcanoes that turned day into night for years at a time. It had diseases that killed 9 out of every 10 children before they could walk." The courtroom remained silent, but Marcus could see some aliens shifting in their seats. "We lived alongside creatures that could tear us apart with claws and teeth. We had no natural weapons except our minds and our willingness to work together. Every meal was a fight. Every night was a gamble with death. Every winter was a war against extinction." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he spoke. "You say we chose violence, but violence chose us first. The universe made us strong by trying to kill us. Every generation that survived was tougher than the last. Every human alive today carries the genes of ancestors who refused to give up when giving up would have been easier." He turned to face the alien gallery directly. "But here is what you do not see. Here is what your evidence does not show. From all that violence, from all that struggle, we learned something that none of you understand." Marcus paused, letting his words echo through the chamber. "We learned compassion." A few aliens made scoffing sounds, but Marcus continued. "You think compassion comes from safety. You think kindness grows in gardens of peace. But real compassion, true mercy, comes from understanding suffering. It comes from knowing what it feels like to lose everything and still choosing to help others." Images of human history had been used against humanity. Now Marcus painted different images with his words. "Yes, we make art about war, but we also make art about love that survives when everything else dies. Yes, we tell stories about violence, but we also tell stories about people who sacrifice themselves for strangers they will never meet." Marcus thought of the human stories that the prosecutor had not mentioned. Stories of people who ran into burning buildings to save others. Stories of soldiers who gave their lives to protect civilians. Stories of ordinary people who became heroes simply by choosing to do what was right instead of what was easy. "You showed this court our weapons," Marcus said, "but you did not show them our hospitals. You showed them our wars, but not our schools. You showed them our soldiers, but not our teachers, our doctors, our scientists, who spend their lives making the universe better for everyone." The energy shackles burned hotter as Marcus's emotions grew stronger, but he ignored the pain. You want to know why we fight? We fight because we love. We fight because there are things in this universe worth protecting. We fight because we would rather die standing than live kneeling. Marcus turned to look at the eternal judge, still silent on his throne of light. When the crystalline collective came to Centauri 7, they did not come in peace. They came with a demand. Surrender your children for experimentation, or we will take them by force. What would any parent do? What would any species do? His voice rose, carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. You say we struck first? Yes, we did. We struck first because we knew what came next if we waited. We struck first because protecting innocent lives was more important than following your rules of engagement. Marcus looked back at the alien gallery, and now he saw something different in some of their faces. Uncertainty. Questions. The Molten Republic surrounded Kepler's station with enough firepower to melt the entire settlement. They demanded that humans abandon the outpost and leave all our equipment behind for them to claim. When we refused, they began moving into attack formation. Marcus's voice dropped to a quieter tone, but somehow it carried even better than when he had been shouting. The oxygen release was not an attack. It was a desperate attempt to save civilian lives when we realized that talking was not going to work. 17 Molten Republic beings died from oxygen poisoning. I am sorry for their deaths, but 200 humans lived because of that action. The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the prosecutor had stopped clicking his mandibles. Every conflict you have shown this court follows the same pattern, Marcus continued. A powerful alien force approaches a human settlement. They make demands that no free people could accept. When humans refuse to surrender their rights, their freedom, or their children, the aliens begin aggressive actions. Only then do humans respond with force. Marcus spread his arms wide, making his shackles burn brighter. You judge us for defending ourselves. You condemn us for refusing to be victims. You want us to be peaceful like you claim to be. But your peace comes from strength. Your peace comes from the knowledge that you can destroy anyone who threatens you. He looked directly at High Arbiter Velthok. Human peace comes from a different place. It comes from knowing that we will fight and die before we let anyone harm those we love. It comes from understanding that some things are worth any sacrifice. Marcus's voice grew quiet but somehow filled the entire chamber. You want to isolate us. You want to lock us away because you fear what we might become. But let me tell you what we will become. He paused, and in that silence, something shifted in the courtroom. We will become whatever this universe needs us to be. If it needs warriors, we will be warriors. If it needs protectors, we will be protectors. If it needs someone willing to stand between evil and innocence, we will stand there until the stars burn out. Marcus looked up at the eternal judge one more time. We are not asking for your forgiveness. We are not begging for your mercy. We are telling you who we are and what we will always be. The species that refuses to give up, no matter what the cost. The silence that followed was complete and absolute. Then, something unprecedented happened. The eternal judge began to move. The sound that filled the courtroom was unlike anything Marcus Webb had ever heard. It was the sound of an ancient being moving for the first time in millennia. The eternal judge, the sovereign of light who had sat motionless on his throne for countless eons, was rising. Every alien in the gallery turned to stare. Some made gasping sounds. Others fell silent in shock. A few actually backed away from their seats as if the judge's movement might somehow hurt them. Marcus watched in amazement as the being of pure energy slowly stood. The light that made up the judge's form pulsed and shifted, growing brighter with each passing second. The throne beneath him, carved from crystallized starlight, began to hum with power. High Arbiter Velthok stood frozen at his table, his mantis-like head turning back and forth between Marcus and the rising judge. His mandibles clicked nervously, and for the first time since the trial began, he looked uncertain. "In 10,000 years," whispered a crystalline being in the gallery, "the eternal judge has never risen during testimony." "Never," agreed a creature that looked like living metal. "Not once in all of galactic history." The judge continued to rise until he stood at his full height. He was enormous, perhaps 15 feet tall, and his form blazed with the light of distant stars. When he moved, reality seemed to bend around him. Space itself appeared to ripple at the edges of his being. Marcus felt the energy shackles around his wrists grow cold. The burning pain that had tormented him for 3 days suddenly stopped. He looked down and saw that the restraints were dimming, their power fading in the presence of something far greater. The eternal judge turned his attention to Marcus, and when their eyes met, Marcus felt as if he was looking into the heart of creation itself. There was intelligence there, vast and ancient, but also something else, something that might have been recognition. "Human," the judge said, and his voice filled every atom of the courtroom. It was not loud, but it was everywhere, at once, resonating through matter and energy alike. "Continue." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Your Honor?" "You speak of your species' nature," the judge said. "You speak of violence born from love, of strength drawn from suffering. Continue. Tell this court what humans truly are." Marcus looked around the courtroom. Every alien was staring at him with expressions he could not read. Fear, perhaps, confusion, something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "We are not perfect," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "We make mistakes. We act in anger sometimes. We have done things we regret." He thought of human history, of wars fought for the wrong reasons, of innocents caught in conflicts they did not start. "But we learn from our mistakes. We grow. We become better than we were." Marcus looked directly at the crystalline being who had testified against him. "Elder Zimnara, you said we showed no mercy at Centauri 7. But what you did not mention is what happened after the battle. Human medical ships stayed in your system for 6 months, helping to rebuild your damaged vessels. Human engineers worked alongside your people to develop new crystalline matrices that were stronger than the original designs. The crystal being's faceted form seemed to dim slightly. That is true," Zimnara admitted quietly. Marcus turned to the liquid metal creature. "Commander Flux, you spoke of the oxygen poisoning at Kepler Station, but you did not mention that human scientists immediately began working on atmosphere converters so that both our species could share the same space safely. Those converters are now used throughout the galaxy." The Mercury-like being rippled uncomfortably. "The converters were a useful development," Flux acknowledged. "Every conflict, every battle, every moment of violence has been followed by human attempts to heal, to rebuild, to make things better," Marcus continued. "We do not fight because we enjoy destruction. We fight because sometimes it is the only way to protect what matters. And when the fighting stops, we immediately begin the work of peace." The eternal judge moved closer to Marcus, his form blazing brighter. "You speak of protection," the judge said. "But protection implies something worth protecting. What do humans protect?" Marcus smiled for the first time since the trial began. "Everything," he said simply. "We protect our families, our friends, our communities. We protect people we have never met. We protect ideas like freedom and justice. We protect the right of every being to choose their own path in life." He gestured toward the alien gallery. "We even protect those who see us as enemies. How many human colonies have provided aid to alien refugees? How many human ships have responded to distress calls from species that consider us monsters?" Marcus saw some aliens looking uncomfortable now. A few were shifting in their seats, whispering to their neighbors. "The prosecutor speaks of human. Aggression, Marcus continued. But human aggression is not random violence. It is focused, purposeful force used to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The judge moved even closer. Now Marcus could feel the heat radiating from the ancient being's form. You describe a species shaped by adversity, the judge said. But adversity shapes many species. What makes humans different? Marcus thought carefully before answering. Choice, he said finally. Every day, every human chooses what kind of person they want to be. We could choose to be cruel. Our history gives us plenty of examples of cruelty. We could choose to be selfish. Survival would be easier if we only cared about ourselves. Marcus looked up at the towering figure of light. But most humans, most of the time, choose to be better. They choose to help instead of hurt. They choose to build instead of destroy. They choose to hope instead of despair. The judge was silent for a long moment, his form pulsing with thoughts too complex for any mortal mind to follow. You speak of hope, the judge said finally. Hope in the face of impossible odds. Hope when logic suggests despair. Hope when the universe itself seems hostile to your existence. Yes, Marcus said. Hope is what makes us human. The eternal judge turned to address the entire courtroom, his voice carrying the weight of eons. I have sat in judgment for 10,000 years, he announced. I have seen species rise and fall. I have witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. I have heard every possible justification for violence, every excuse for aggression, every rationalization for war. The chamber was so quiet that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. But I have never, the judge continued, heard anything like this. He gestured toward Marcus with one arm of pure energy. This human speaks not just for his species, but for the very essence of what it means to be alive. To struggle, to suffer, to choose hope over despair, love over hate, protection over abandonment. The judge's form began to change, growing even brighter. This trial has shown me something I had forgotten in my long existence. True strength does not come from the absence of conflict. It comes from choosing to do what is right, despite the cost. Marcus felt the shackles around his wrists dissolve completely. The energy bonds that had held him simply melted away like ice in sunlight. Captain Marcus Webb, the judge said, you stand free. But Marcus knew that this was only the beginning. The real judgment was yet to come. The eternal judge stood at his full height, blazing like a newborn star in the center of the courtroom. His light filled every corner of the chamber, making the crystal walls glow with rainbow colors. When he spoke, his words carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the birth and death of galaxies. I have made my decision, the judge announced. The alien gallery fell into complete silence. High Arbiter Velthok stood frozen at his table, his compound eyes reflecting the judge's brilliant light. Even Marcus's pathetic defense attorney had finally looked up from his slime-covered notes. Marcus stood free of his shackles, but he felt the weight of his entire species' future pressing down on him. Everything humanity had been, was, or could become hung in the balance of the next few moments. For 3 days, the judge continued, this court has heard evidence of human violence, human aggression, human disregard for galactic law. The evidence is substantial. It is accurate. It is damning. Marcus felt his heart sink. After everything, after his speech, after the judge's unprecedented response, it seemed that humanity would still be condemned. But, the judge said, and that single word changed everything, evidence tells only part of any story. Facts without context are like stars without space. They exist, but they have no meaning. The judge turned to face the alien gallery, his form pulsing with ancient wisdom. I have lived for millennia beyond counting. I have seen species that claim to be peaceful because they had never faced true hardship. I have witnessed civilizations that boasted of their moral superiority because they had never been tested by real adversity. His voice grew stronger, filling the vast chamber. I have watched entire races collapse when faced with the first serious threat to their existence. I have seen beings who spoke of love and compassion abandon both principles the moment their comfort was challenged. The judge gestured toward Marcus. But here stands a representative of a species that has been tested by fire since the moment of their birth. A species that learned to love in the midst of violence, to hope in the face of despair, to choose mercy when cruelty would be easier. Several aliens in the gallery began to shift uncomfortably. A few whispered among themselves, but most remained silent, hanging on every word. The prosecutor has painted humans as monsters, the judge continued. He has shown their capacity for destruction, their willingness to use violence, their tendency to strike first when threatened. All of this is true. Velthok's mandibles clicked, hopefully, but the judge was not finished. What the prosecutor failed to understand is that these very traits, these characteristics he condemns, are evidence of something far more precious than peaceful compliance. The judge's light grew even brighter. They are evidence of a species that values something more than their own survival. They are proof of beings who will fight and die for principles that cannot be touched or measured. They demonstrate a willingness to sacrifice everything for the protection of others. Marcus watched in amazement as the ancient being continued to speak, defending humanity with words that carried the weight of cosmic authority. The humans did not choose violence as their nature, the judge declared. Violence was chosen for them by a universe that tested them at every turn. But from that violence, they forged something remarkable, a moral code that values life, protects the innocent, and stands against injustice regardless of the cost. The judge turned to look directly at High Arbiter Velthok. The prosecutor speaks of human aggression as if it were a disease to be cured. But I have seen true evil in this galaxy. I have witnessed species that destroyed others for sport, beings that enslaved entire civilizations for convenience, empires that committed genocide simply because they could. The mantis-like prosecutor seemed to shrink under the judge's gaze. Human. Aggression is not evil, the judge stated. It is protective. It is focused. It is the response of a species that refuses to allow innocent beings to suffer when they have the power to prevent that suffering. The judge moved toward the center of the courtroom, his form now so bright that some aliens had to shield their eyes. The charges against Captain Marcus Webb and humanity are dismissed, he announced. A gasp went through the alien gallery. Some creatures rose to their feet in shock. Others made sounds of protest or disbelief. But the judge was not finished. Furthermore, he continued, I hereby offer humanity something that has never been offered to any species in the history of this galaxy, a permanent seat on the Galactic Council. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Aliens shouted in dozens of languages. Some demanded explanations, others called for appeals. A few actually began to leave, apparently unable to accept what they had just heard. The judge raised one arm, and silence fell instantly. Humanity has earned this honor not despite their capacity for violence, but because of how they choose to use it. They have shown that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when destruction is necessary and the courage to act on that knowledge. Marcus stood in stunned silence, barely able to process what he was hearing. The galaxy needs protectors, the judge said. It needs beings who will stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. It needs a species that understands the true cost of freedom and is willing to pay that price. The judge turned to Marcus one final time. Captain Webb, you spoke of hope as the defining characteristic of humanity. Today, humanity becomes the hope of this galaxy. You will face challenges that will test every principle you have described. You will encounter threats that will push your species to its limits. The ancient being extended an appendage of pure energy toward Marcus. But I believe you will meet those challenges as you have met every other test in your species' history. Together, with courage, and with an unshakable commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Marcus reached out without hesitation and grasped the judge's energy form. The touch sent power flowing through him, not painful like the shackles had been, but warm and strengthening. "Welcome to the greater galaxy, humanity," the eternal judge said. "May you teach us all what it truly means to live with purpose." As Marcus stood there, hand clasped with a being of pure light, he understood that everything had changed. Humanity's real journey among the stars was just beginning. They would face it not as conquerors or victims, but as guardians who had earned their place through the simple act of being authentically, courageously human. The trial was over. The future had begun. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, threats that had slumbered for eons began to stir, drawn by the light of a species that refused to surrender hope. The galaxy would never be the same. Marcus Webb walked out of that courtroom as a free man. But more than that, he walked out as the first human representative to the Galactic Council. Behind him, aliens who had come to condemn his species now whispered among themselves about the remarkable beings called humans. The universe was about to learn what humanity could accomplish when they had something worth protecting that was bigger than just themselves. And for the first time in galactic history, the ancient civilizations felt something they had almost forgotten: hope for the future.